The clatter of a fork hitting the floor is usually the loudest sound in a place like the Gilded Sparrow. But tonight, it's a young woman's voice, trembling but firm, cutting through the silence. It's the icy glare of a billionaire, a man who could buy the entire city block without checking his bank balance, and it's the fate of an old man, his shoulders slumped in humiliation, hanging in the balance. What could possibly make a simple waitress with nothing to her name but student debt and worn-out shoes risk everything for a humble janitor? The answer isn't just about kindness. It's about a secret that could shatter a corporate empire and a past that binds them all in ways they could never imagine. Stay tuned to uncover the truth behind the black card. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater. Perched on the 60th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, it was a stage where New York's elite performed their nightly ritual of wealth and power. The chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. The cutlery was sterling silver, and the waiters moved with the silent, predatory grace of sharks. And in the midst of this opulent performance was Amelia. At 24, Amelia was a paradox. She possessed a quiet grace that fit the restaurant's elegant decor, but her eyes held a weariness that spoke of a life lived far from this gilded cage. She moved through the maze of tables with an efficiency born of desperation. Her smile a carefully constructed mask that hid the constant anxiety of rent tuition for her online courses and the ever-present fear of being one misstep away from unemployment. She was a ghost in the machine, her existence acknowledged only when a water glass needed refilling or a dish needed clearing. Her only real friend in this ecosystem of ambition and pretense was Samuel. Samuel Kowalski was 72 years old, with a back bent from a lifetime of labor and hands gnarled like ancient tree roots. He was the restaurant's janitor. To the other staff, he was as much a part of the fixtures and fittings as the marble floors he so meticulously polished. They saw his faded grey uniform and his slow, deliberate movements, and saw nothing more. But Amelia saw him. She saw the way his eyes, the color of a washed-out sky, would light up when she saved him a leftover pastry from the kitchen. She saw the profound dignity in the way he worked, treating every scuff mark as a personal affront, every speck of dust an enemy to be vanquished. They had an unspoken bond forged in the quiet pre-dawn hours before the restaurant opened and the late hours after the last wealthy patron had departed. He would tell her stories of his late wife, Maria, and the small bakery they once owned in Brooklyn, its sweet scent of yeast and sugar, a stark contrast to the sterile, expensive perfumes that hung in the air of the Gilded Sparrow. He spoke of his son, a soldier lost in a forgotten war, and the pride that still shone in his eyes, even through the veil of grief. Amelia, in turn, would talk about her dream of becoming a graphic designer, a dream that felt as distant and unattainable as the stars twinkling outside the panoramic windows. "You have a good heart," Amelia Samuel would say, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Don't let this place harden it." It was a warning she took to heart. She watched the other waiters, like the slick and ambitious Liam, who would step on anyone to get a better section or a bigger tip. She saw the restaurant manager, Mr. Dubois, a man whose spine seemed to dissolve in the presence of a wealthy client. She saw the transactional nature of every interaction, the cold calculus of profit and loss that governed every smile and every compliment. And she fought every single day to keep her own heart from turning to stone. Their friendship was a tiny, fragile island of authenticity in a vast ocean of artifice. It was a secret garden cultivated in stolen moments, a shared nod across the bustling dining room, a quiet word in the clatter of the service hallway, the simple act of Amelia ensuring Samuel had a hot meal at the end of his long shift. It was a bond that went unnoticed by the patrons and management. To them, the young waitress and the old janitor were just two more cogs in the magnificent impersonal machine. They had no idea that this quiet, unassuming connection was a sleeping giant about to be woken by the arrival of a storm. A storm in the form of a man for whom the world was a chessboard, and everyone in it a pawn. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night. It wasn't a meteorological event, but a human one, and his name was Sterling Blackwood. The name was whispered among the staff like a curse long before he actually stepped through the door. Blackwood wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan, a predator of the tech world who had built an empire, Blackwood Dynamics, by devouring smaller companies whole. His face, sharp and severe, was a regular feature on the covers of business magazines, usually under headlines that included words like ruthless, uncompromising as toi, and billionaire. His reservation had been made under a different name, but the moment he entered, a palpable wave of fear rippled through the Gilded Sparrow. He was flanked by two stern-looking men in dark suits who scanned the room as if expecting an assassination attempt. Blackwood himself was dressed in a suit so black it seemed to absorb the light around it, tailored with a precision that bespoke an obscene price tag. His hair was silver at the temples, a distinguished touch that did nothing to soften the icy contempt in his blue eyes. He moved with an aura of absolute authority, as if he didn't just own the table he was being led to, but the very air everyone else breathed. Mr. Dubois, the manager, practically genuflected as he greeted him. His usual professional composure had evaporated, replaced by a fawning obsequiousness that made Amelia's stomach turn. "Mr. Blackwood, an absolute honor to have you with us tonight." Dubois gushed, his voice an octave higher than usual. Blackwood didn't respond. He simply handed his coat to one of his guards without a glance, and surveyed the dining room with a look of profound boredom, as if the stunning view of the city, the crystal chandeliers and the hushed elegance were all a personal disappointment to him. He was seated at the best table in the house, a corner booth with a panoramic view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. It was in Liam's section. Amelia could see the avaricious gleam in Liam's eyes from across the room. A tip from Sterling Blackwood could be life-changing. Amelia was busy at a nearby table pouring water for a couple celebrating their anniversary. But she couldn't help but watch the drama unfold. The air around Blackwood's table was thick with tension. He was there with a young woman who looked like a model draped in diamonds that glittered nervously under the soft lighting. The woman seemed just as terrified as the staff. Liam approached the table, his usual smarmy confidence on full display. "Good evening, sir, ma'am. My name is Liam, and I'll be your server this evening. Can I start you with some of our finest champagne, perhaps the Perrier Jouet Belle Époque Rose?" Blackwood didn't even look at him. He waved a dismissive hand. "Bring me a Scotch, Macallan 72, and don't speak unless you're spoken to." Liam's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he pasted it back on. "Of course, sir. An excellent choice." He scurried away, his bravado punctured. For the next hour, the entire restaurant staff seemed to orbit Blackwood's table. He was hypercritical of everything. The Scotch, he claimed, was a degree too warm. The appetizer, a delicate seared scallop dish, was pedestrian. He sent back his main course, a Wagyu steak that cost more than Amelia's weekly salary, claiming it was overcooked by precisely 12 seconds. With each complaint, Mr. Dubois would rush over apologizing profusely, his face a mask of sweat and fear. Amelia watched it all with a growing sense of indignation. It wasn't just the arrogance, it was the cruelty. He seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from belittling people, from exercising his power in the most demeaning ways possible. He was a bully on a grand scale, his wealth a cudgel he used to beat the world into submission. The young woman with him said nothing, staring at her plate as if willing herself to disappear. Amelia felt a knot of anger tighten in her chest. She thought of Samuel, of his quiet dignity and his worn-out hands. She thought of how he treated his work with more respect than this billionaire treated human beings. She saw in Sterling Blackwood everything she despised about this world. The casual cruelty of the powerful, the way money could strip a person of their humanity, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell of ego. She had no idea that her world and Samuel's was about to collide with his in the most explosive way imaginable. The catalyst for the explosion was something so small, so utterly insignificant, that it would have gone unnoticed on any other night. Samuel was making his rounds, his mop bucket and cart, moving with a quiet efficiency that was the hallmark of his long career. The Gilded Sparrow, in its quest for ultimate aesthetic perfection, had placed tall, slender, decorative stands in various corners, each holding a single minimalist art glass vase. They were absurdly placed, a triumph of form over function, and a constant hazard for the cleaning staff. As Samuel carefully mopped the polished floor near Sterling Blackwood's table, the edge of his cart gently nudged the base of one of these stands. The stand wobbled for a terrifying second. The vase on top, a swirl of blue and green glass, tilted precariously. Amelia, who was clearing a nearby table, saw the whole thing. Her heart leaped into her throat. Samuel's hand, surprisingly swift, shot out and steadied the stand. The vase settled back into place. Nothing fell. Nothing broke. Not a single drop of water was spilled. A crisis averted, but Sterling Blackwood had seen it. He had been looking for a target, for some new way to assert his dominance, and the universe had just served him one on a silver platter. "You!" The word cracked through the restaurant like a whip. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Samuel froze his hand still on the stand. He looked up, his pale blue eyes wide with confusion and fear. He saw Blackwood pointing a finger at him. A finger that had signed deals worth billions, now aimed at him like a weapon. "Did you see that?" Blackwood demanded, his voice resonating with theatrical rage. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but to the captive audience of the restaurant. This relic almost destroyed a $30,000 art piece with his filthy mop bucket. The price of the vase was a wild exaggeration, but in that moment it was gospel. Samuel began to stammer, his face flushing with a deep, painful red of humiliation. No, sir, it didn't fall. It's all right. I'm very sorry, sir." "Sorry?" Blackwood scoffed, a cruel, ugly sound. "You're sorry an old, clumsy oaf like you shouldn't be allowed in a place like this. You are a liability. You are incompetent." He turned his venomous glare towards Mr. Dubois, who was already rushing towards the table, his face ashen. "Dubois, what is the meaning of this? Why do you have senile old men bumping into the furniture? I come here for excellence, not to watch a live performance of a retirement home's day out. Mr. Blackwood, I am so terribly sorry. It was a minor incident. Nothing was damaged." Dubois pleaded, his voice trembling. "I don't care if anything was damaged," Blackwood snarled, rising slightly from his seat, a predator sensing the kill. "The point is the principle, the sheer incompetence. I will not dine in an establishment that employs such useless dead weight." He looked directly at Samuel, whose shoulders were now slumped in utter defeat, the weight of the public shaming crushing him. "Get this relic out of my sight," Blackwood commanded, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "He's fired." Silence. A profound, absolute silence fell over the Gilded Sparrow. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the distant sounds of the kitchen, it all vanished. All that remained was the raw, brutal command hanging in the air. Fired. Just like that. A man's life, his livelihood, his dignity dismissed as easily as sending back a steak. Samuel looked as if he had been physically struck. His face was a canvas of shock and shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, clutching the handle of his mop, the symbol of his life's work, now the instrument of his disgrace. Mr. Dubois was frozen, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. Fear of Blackwood, a flicker of pity for Samuel, and the overwhelming instinct for self-preservation. The other staff members averted their eyes, pretending to be busy, desperate not to be drawn into the maelstrom. It was a collective act of cowardice, and Amelia felt a hot surge of fury rise in her throat, burning away her fear. She looked at Samuel, so small and so broken, and then at Blackwood, so large and so monstrous in his power, and in that moment, she knew she couldn't stay silent. She couldn't be one of them. Against every instinct for survival, against every rational thought that screamed at her to stay quiet, to keep her head down to save her job, Amelia moved. She placed the plates she was holding onto a nearby service stand with a soft, deliberate click that seemed to echo in the cavernous silence. She straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and walked toward Sterling Blackwood's table. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her palms were slick with sweat. But as she walked, a strange sense of calm settled over her. It was the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose, because in that moment, her job meant less than her own self-respect. She stopped a respectful distance from the table, not in the obsequious posture of a servant, but standing straight, her chin held high. "Mr. Blackwood, sir." Her voice was quiet, but it carried an astonishing weight. It cut through the tension and commanded attention. Blackwood, who had been enjoying his victory, turned his head slowly, an expression of mild surprise on his face. He looked her up and down, a dismissive sneer forming on his lips. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "The janitor's union representative." A few nervous titters came from a nearby table, but they died out quickly under the intensity of Amelia's gaze. "My name is Amelia," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm a waitress here, and I saw what happened. It was a minor accident. The cart barely touched the stand, and the vase didn't even break." Samuel steadied it himself. "I am not blind, girl," Blackwood retorted, clearly annoyed that a mere waitress would dare to contradict him. "I saw a clumsy old man being a clumsy old man." This was it, the point of no return. Amelia could apologize, back away, and maybe, just maybe, salvage her job. Instead, she took another step forward. "No, sir," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "What I saw was a dedicated man doing his job, a job he has done at this restaurant for over 20 years. She turned her gaze from Blackwood to the other patrons who were now watching, utterly captivated. "This is Samuel Kowalski. He arrives at 4 in the morning every morning to make sure this place is spotless before a single customer walks in. He polishes the floors you walk on, cleans the windows you look through, and does it with more care and pride than anyone I have ever met. He isn't dead weight, Mr. Blackwood. He is the foundation this restaurant is built on. He has more integrity in his little finger than some people have in their entire bodies. The jab was not subtle. It hung in the air, aimed directly at the billionaire. Blackwood's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. His date shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Dubois looked like he was about to have a coronary. He's also a widower. Amelia continued, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its power. A grandfather. A man who deserved to be treated with respect, not humiliated in front of a room full of strangers for an accident that never even happened. She finally turned her gaze back to Blackwood. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a blazing, righteous anger. So no, you can't fire him. It's not right. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer a silence of fear, but one of stunned astonishment. A waitress had just stood up to Sterling Blackwood. She hadn't just defended the janitor. She had publicly and eloquently shamed one of the most powerful men in the city. Everyone braced for the inevitable explosion. They expected Blackwood to erupt, to have her thrown out, to ruin her life with a single phone call. Liam was watching from the service station with a look of pure, unadulterated shock, which was quickly morphing into smug satisfaction. The foolish girl had just committed career suicide. Amelia stood her ground, her body trembling with adrenaline, awaiting the final blow. Her career at the Gilded Sparrow was over. She knew it. But as she looked at Samuel, who was now staring at her with tears welling in his watery blue eyes, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had done the right thing, and that was a currency more valuable than any tip. Sterling Blackwood did not explode. What happened instead was far stranger and infinitely more shocking. The icy rage in his eyes flickered and dinked like a switch being flipped. The severe, cruel lines of his face seemed to soften. The sneer was gone. He leaned back in his chair, the tension leaving his powerful frame, and he looked at Amelia. Truly looked at her for the first time. The gaze was no longer contemptuous or dismissive. It was sharp, analytical, and surprisingly appreciative. A slow, thoughtful smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Incredible," he murmured, almost to himself. He then looked around the silent, gawking room, at the terrified Mr. Dubois, at the envious Liam, at the stunned patrons. His gaze finally rested on Samuel, who was looking back and forth between Amelia and the billionaire in utter confusion. Blackwood let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment before he spoke again, his voice completely changed. The harsh, grating tone was gone, replaced by a smooth, calm baritone that commanded authority without needing to shout. "Well, Dubois," he said, "it seems you have at least one employee with a spine." He reached into the inner pocket of his exquisitely tailored jacket. For a terrifying second, Amelia thought he might be reaching for a phone to call his lawyers. Instead, he pulled out a wallet. From the wallet, he produced a card. It was sleek, made of what looked like anodized titanium, and it was utterly profoundly black. There were no numbers on the front, only a name embossed in silver. It was an object of legend, a mythical beast of personal finance, the American Express Centurion Card. The Black Card, a symbol of unlimited wealth and access offered only by invitation to the world's absolute richest. He held it between his thumb and forefinger and placed it on the table. With a flick of his finger, he slid it across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Amelia. She stared at it, uncomprehending. The black rectangle sat on the white tablecloth, seeming to pulsate with a power of its own. "You have more courage and integrity than my entire board of directors and my last 3 corporate lawyers combined," Blackwood said, his voice laced with an almost amused respect. He gestured to the card. "That's for you." Amelia blinked. I don't understand." "My name isn't Sterling Blackwood," the man said, a wry grin spreading across his face. "That's just a rather unpleasant persona I adopt when I need to see what people are really made of. A human litmus test, if you will. My real name is Marcus Thorne." A new name rippled through the room, accompanied by gasps of recognition. Marcus Thorne. Not a tech vulture, but a legendary investor and philanthropist. The CEO of Thorne Industries, a massive privately held conglomerate known for its ethical business practices and for turning failing companies into models of success. He was famously reclusive, his picture rarely seen. "Thorne Industries," Marcus continued, his voice resonating with quiet power, "is in the final stages of acquiring the Ethelred Hospitality Group, the parent corporation that owns this restaurant, and 200 others like it. I was here tonight, incognito, to perform a final audit. Not of the books my accountants handled that, but of the soul of the company. I wanted to see the moral fiber of the people on the ground floor. I wanted to see if they were people worth investing in." He gestured around the room. "And I have to say, for a while there, I was profoundly disappointed." His eyes flickered towards Mr. Dubois, who visibly wilted. "But you, Amelia," he looked back at her, his gaze intense. "You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking. With flying colors." He nodded toward the card again. "This isn't just a credit card. It's a key. It has a virtually unlimited line of credit and direct access to my personal concierge service, which can accomplish almost anything you can think of. Consider it a signing bonus." Amelia was speechless. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the whiplash of the last 10 minutes. Fired, no weight commended, by a fake billionaire who was actually a real, more respectable billionaire. "Your first official task," Marcus Thorne said, his expression turning serious, "is to ensure that Mr. Samuel Kowalski is never threatened or disrespected again. Effective immediately, he is to receive a 50% raise in his salary and a full bonus. You will use that card to wire the funds to the Ethelred payroll department tomorrow morning with a direct order from my office." He then looked at Samuel with a warm, genuine smile. "Samuel, my sincere apologies for the distress I caused you. It was a necessary, though unpleasant part of the test. Your dignity in the face of it was remarkable." Samuel, tears now streaming freely down his weathered cheeks, could only nod, overwhelmed. Marcus Thorne stood up, his 2 guards moving to attention. He placed a different, much more normal-looking business card on the table next to the black card. It had his name, his real name, and a private number. "Call me tomorrow, Amelia," he said. "We have much to discuss. This was about more than just a rude customer and a janitor. This is just the beginning." With a final enigmatic smile, he turned and swept out of the restaurant, his entourage trailing in his wake. He left behind a room full of stunned people, a weeping, grateful old man, and a young waitress holding a piece of black titanium that had just shattered her reality into 1,000,000 pieces. The moment Marcus Thorne departed, the Gilded Sparrow erupted. The dam of professional silence broke, and a flood of noise and chaotic energy rushed in. Patrons were buzzing, whispering excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Phones were already out, no doubt recounting the story to envious friends. The tale of the waitress, the janitor, and the Billionaire's test was already on its way to becoming an urban legend. For the staff, the reaction was more complex. Mr. Dubois, his face a ghastly shade of pale, approached Amelia, as if she were a celestial being. His fawning civility had transferred from the dehotted Billionaire to her. "Amelia, my dear girl," he stammered, wringing his hands. "Simply incredible. I always knew you had a special quality, a real strength of character. I was just, playing my part. For Mr. Thorne, of course." Amelia just looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't have the energy to call him out on the lie. Nearby, Liam was staring at the black card in her hand with a look of raw, corrosive envy. His face was a thunderous mask of resentment. He had been so close to the prize, and this mousy, self-righteous girl had snatched it away by being noble. It was a concept so alien to him that it made him physically angry. He slammed a tray down at the service station and stormed off towards the locker rooms. But Amelia's focus was singular. She turned to Samuel, who was being patted on the back by a few of the busboys, his tears of humiliation now replaced by tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She walked over to him and gently took his gnarled hand. "Are you okay, Samuel?" she asked softly. He squeezed her hand, his whole body trembling. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You were like an angel, like my Maria. She never backed down from a bully." He looked at her, his old eyes shining with a fierce, protective pride. "He gave you that card. You deserve it. You deserve the world." Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. She pocketed the heavy titanium card. It felt impossibly foreign in her cheap uniform pocket. "He gave you a raise, Samuel. A big one." A fresh wave of tears welled in his eyes. "For my granddaughter," he whispered. "For her college." Later that night, long after her shift ended, Amelia sat in her tiny, cramped apartment. The black card lay on her second-hand coffee table, catching the dim light from the street lamp outside. It looked absurd amidst her worn furniture and stacks of textbooks. It felt like a prop from a different movie one she had accidentally wandered into. She couldn't sleep. Marcus Thorne's final words echoed in her mind. This was about more than just a rude customer and a janitor. This is just the beginning. The next day, driven by a gnawing curiosity, she decided to use the card's most intriguing feature. With trembling fingers, she called the number for the Centurion concierge service. A calm, impossibly polished voice answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Ms. Evans. This is an automated greeting. Your assigned concierge, David, will be with you momentarily. Please note this line is secure." A moment later, a human voice, just as calm and polished, came on. "Ms. Evans, David speaking. How may I assist you today on behalf of Mr. Thorne?" Hi," Amelia stammered, feeling completely out of her depth. "I have a research request." "Of course," David said, his tone unwavering. "What is the subject?" "Ethelred Hospitality Group," Amelia said, taking a deep breath. "Specifically their employee relations and retirement policies. I want to know about their CEO, a man named Alistair Finch." "Understood. Please hold for a moment while I access the relevant databases." The silence lasted for less than 30 seconds. When David came back on the line, there was a subtle shift in his tone, a hint of something cold and clinical. "Ms. Evans," he said, "I have the preliminary data. Ethelred's official corporate literature speaks of valuing legacy employees. However, analysis of their turnover rates over the past 5 years reveals a statistically significant pattern. The company has an employee attrition rate that is 250% higher than the industry average for employees over the age of 60, specifically for those with over 15 years of service. Amelia's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means, David explained patiently, that there is a clear, actionable pattern of long-term older employees leaving the company. The data strongly suggests a corporate policy, likely unwritten, of managed attrition, forcing older, higher-paid employees out before they can collect their full retirement and pension benefits. You mean they fire them? Not always so overtly, David clarified. It can manifest as reduced hours, unfavorable shift changes, relocations, or a sudden increase in negative performance reviews for previously model employees. It's a strategy designed to make their positions untenable, forcing them to resign. It's a practice that is morally reprehensible but notoriously difficult to prove in court. The CEO, Alistair Finch, has a documented history of implementing similar cost-cutting strategies at his previous 2 companies. Amelia leaned back, her head spinning. It all clicked into place. Samuel, his 20 years of service, the sudden public and brutal attempt at falling him over nothing. It wasn't random. It was a demonstration. Marcus Thorne's test wasn't just a whimsical character assessment. He knew. He must have seen this data. He knew Ethelred was rotten from the top down. He wasn't just testing the moral fiber of the staff. He was searching for something specific. He was looking for an ally. Someone on the inside, someone with unimpeachable integrity, who wasn't part of the corrupt corporate structure. Someone who would stand up for a janitor not because it was advantageous, but because it was right. He hadn't just given her a gift. He had given her a weapon and a mission. The realization settled over her with a terrifying weight. She was no longer just Amelia Evans, the struggling waitress. She was now a player in a game with stakes far higher than she could have ever imagined, a pawn who had just been promoted to queen. The next morning, Amelia called the private number Marcus Thorne had left her. He answered on the second ring. "Amelia," he said, his voice warm and direct. There was no pretense, no small talk. "I assume you've had some time to think." "I had your concierge do some research," she replied, her own voice more steady than she expected. "About Ethelred and Alistair Finch." There was a pause on the other end. "And what did you conclude?" Marcus asked. "That your test wasn't random," Amelia said, pacing her small living room. "You knew Finch was pushing out older employees. You were looking for someone who would fight back." "Precisely," Marcus confirmed. "Alistair Finch is a cancer. He boosts short-term profits by destroying the long-term health and morale of a company. He's a master at covering his tracks with golden parachutes and non-disclosure agreements. My acquisition of Ethelred will be finalized in 2 weeks. The moment it is, I can fire him. But if I do it without cause, he walks away with a severance package worth over $50 million. More importantly, without irrefutable proof of his discriminatory practices, the hundreds of employees he's already forced out have no legal recourse." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I can't get that proof from the outside, Amelia. My corporate investigators would be spotted a mile away. Finch's inner circle is loyal because he pays them well to be. I need someone on the inside, someone no one would ever suspect." The implication was clear, and it terrified her. "You want me to be a spy?" "I want you to be a hero," Marcus corrected gently. "You already showed you have the courage. That black card is your resource. David, your concierge, is more than just a booking agent. He's the head of my private intelligence division. He has access to resources you can't even imagine. but he needs a human element on the ground. You. Amelia sank onto her couch, her head in her hands. This was insane. A week ago, her biggest problem was whether she could cover her electricity bill. Now she was being asked to take down a corrupt CEO. "What do you want me to do? I'm a waitress." "You are whatever you need to be," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You are now a very wealthy waitress, a lottery winner, a lucky heiress, whatever cover story you choose. People like Alistair Finch are drawn to wealth and power like moths to a flame. He'll be curious about you. Use that. Use the resources I've given you to get close to listen to find the evidence we need. David will guide you on the specifics, but the heart of the mission relies on your intuition, on the same integrity you showed when you stood up for Samuel." He then laid out the stakes. Alistair Finch knows the acquisition is happening. He's smart. He'll be preparing for his exit, and that means destroying any evidence of his wrongdoing. He's planning a company-wide transition gala next week. I believe that's when he'll make his move, a final mass layoff of older workers and the shredding of any incriminating files. We have until then to stop him. Amelia felt a wave of nausea. This was too much, too fast. But then she thought of Samuel. She thought of his face crumpled in humiliation. She thought of the hundreds of other Samuels in the company people who had given their lives to a corporation that was planning to discard them like trash just before the finish line. Her fear began to curdle, hardening into a steely resolve. "Okay," she said the word, tasting strange and foreign. "Okay, I'll do it." The transformation of Amelia Evans began that afternoon. Her first call was to David. Her objective: get noticed by Alistair Finch. Finch is an egomaniac and a snob. David's voice came through her earbud, which was now her constant companion. He frequents a handful of exclusive clubs and restaurants, but we can do better. He's also a trustee of the New York Modern Art Foundation, and their annual benefit auction is in 3 days. It's the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. Tickets are impossible to get. "So what do I do?" Amelia asked, looking at her wardrobe, which consisted mostly of jeans and worn-out sweaters. "You, Ms. Evans, are going to become the Foundation's newest and most generous benefactor. I'm transferring $2 million to them in your name as an anonymous donation. Anonymous, that is, until you arrive. You won't just get a ticket. You'll be the guest of honor. Finch will have no choice but to seek you out." The next 3 days were a blur. David was a logistical whirlwind, a high-end fashion consultant. A woman with a severe haircut and a withering gaze named Genevieve appeared at her apartment, followed by racks of couture gowns. A team handled hair and makeup. Another expert drilled her on etiquette art history and the intricate social genealogies of New York's elite. She learned who was feuding with whom, who had old money versus new money, and how to hold a champagne flute without looking like she was about to take a sobriety test. She was given a new identity: Amelia Evans, the mysterious heiress of a recently deceased and very private European industrialist. The story was simple, elegant, and nearly impossible to disprove. David's team had already created a digital ghost for her fictional father, complete with fake articles and a labyrinthine corporate history. When she looked in the mirror on the night of the benefit, she didn't recognize herself. The woman staring back at her was a stranger draped in a shimmering midnight blue gown that seemed woven from starlight. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and a necklace of sapphires and diamonds, alone from a jeweler arranged by David, rested on her collarbone. She was beautiful, poised, and looked every bit the part of a woman who could donate $2 million without a second thought. But beneath the silken jewels, her heart was still hammering with the frantic terror of a waitress about to face down a titan. As her chauffeured car pulled up to the museum, she took a deep breath. The shy, struggling waitress was gone. Tonight, she was a weapon, and she was about to be aimed directly at the heart of the enemy. The Museum of Modern Art was a galaxy of glittering stars. The air hummed with the quiet, confident chatter of the city's most powerful figures. Amelia stepped out of the car, and for a moment she felt a paralyzing wave of imposter syndrome. Then she felt the cool, heavy weight of the sapphire necklace against her skin, a reminder of the power she now wielded. She straightened her shoulders and walked in. As David had predicted, her arrival caused a stir. The museum's director greeted her personally, gushing with gratitude for her unprecedented generosity. Word of the mysterious new benefactor spread through the crowd like wildfire, and soon, just as planned, a man made his way towards her. Alistair Finch was exactly as she'd pictured him, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo, with a predatory smile and eyes that appraised everything and everyone in terms of their value. He oozed a slick, practiced charm. "Miss Evans," he said, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles. "Alistair Finch. I'm on the board here. I just wanted to personally welcome you and thank you for your incredible contribution to the arts. We were all quite stunned." "Art should be supported," Amelia replied, her voice cool and measured, echoing the lessons from her etiquette coach. "My late father believed that beauty was one of the few things worth investing in." Finch's eyes lit up at the mention of her father. The bait was taken. A wise man. I would have been honored to know him. For the rest of the evening, Finch attached himself to her. He was insufferably arrogant, but Amelia played her part. She feigned a naive interest in his business acumen, asking him about Ethelred hospitality. "It's a delicate business," he said, sipping his champagne. "Managing assets, both physical and human. The key to profitability is efficiency, trimming the fat. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for the greater good of the company." "Difficult decisions," Amelia prompted gently. "Legacy costs," he said, the euphemism rolling off his tongue. "Long-term employees, while loyal, can sometimes be a significant drain on resources. Pensions, higher salaries. It's a tough market. One has to be pragmatic." He was practically confessing, cloaking his cruelty in the sterile language of corporate strategy. Amelia's mission became clearer. She needed proof, not just veiled admissions. Over the next few days, using her newfound status, she engineered several more chance encounters with Finch. Guided by David, she mentioned an interest in investing in the hotel industry. Finch, smelling a potential windfall from a naive heiress, became her self-appointed mentor. He invited her to the Ethelred corporate headquarters for a tour. This was her chance. The Ethelred Transition Gala was scheduled for that Friday night. David's intel suggested that while Finch schmoozed with his executives at the party downstairs, a private document shredding company would be arriving at his top-floor office to dispose of the legacy employee files. The plan was audacious. Amelia was to attend the gala as Finch's special guest. During the party, she had to slip away, gain access to his office, and use a specialized device provided by David, disguised as a sleek black USB drive on her keychain, to copy the files from his server before they could be deleted. The night of the gala, the Ethelred building buzzed with an anxious energy. Amelia, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown, stood by Finch's side, smiling and nodding as he introduced her to his senior executives. All the while, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. David was in her ear, feeding her information about security patrols and camera locations. At 9:15 p.m., as Finch was engaged in a lengthy, self-congratulatory speech, Amelia made her move. Excusing herself to the powder room, she slipped into a service corridor. Following David's precise instructions, she ascended a private staff elevator, her heart pounding with every floor she passed. Finch's office was on the 75th floor. As expected, a high-tech keypad secured to the door. "The code is his daughter's birthday," David's voice whispered in her ear. "He's a sentimental narcissist." Amelia keyed in the numbers, and the lock clicked open. The office was a monument to ego. Dark mahogany, expensive art, and a massive desk overlooking the city. On the desk sat the server tower. She had minutes, maybe less. She pulled the USB drive from her keychain and inserted it. A small light began to blink rapidly. "Data transfer in progress." Suddenly, she heard the ding of the elevator. Her blood turned to ice. The shredding company was early. Or worse. The office door swung open. It wasn't the shredders. It was Alistair Finch, and he was not smiling. "Looking for something, Ms. Evans?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "I must admit, your story was good." The grieving heiress. "But I'm a suspicious man. I had you looked into. It turns out your late industrialist father is a work of fiction. A very expensive fiction, I might add." He took a step into the room, his eyes falling on the blinking USB drive. His face contorted in a mask of pure fury. "So that's it. Thorne. That bastard sent you." Amelia backed away, her mind racing. "It's over, Alistair. I have everything." "You have nothing," he snarled, lunging for the desk. "I'll destroy that drive, and you with it." Just as he reached for the server, the main office doors burst open. Marcus Thorne stood there, flanked by two of his guards, and a woman in a sharp business suit holding a briefcase. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Alistair," Marcus said calmly. Finch froze, cornered. The blinking light on Amelia's drive turned solid green. The transfer was complete. She yanked it from the port and held it up. "It's too late," Amelia said, her voice shaking but triumphant. The woman with Marcus stepped forward. "Alistair Finch, you are hereby served. This is a preliminary injunction preventing the destruction of company property and a notice of a class action lawsuit on behalf of 572 former and current employees of Ethelred Hospitality for age-based discrimination." Finch's face collapsed. The fight went out of him, replaced by the sickening pallor of utter defeat. He had been outmaneuvered, beaten at his own game, by a man he despised, and a waitress. Resolution: Alistair Finch was fired, stripped of his golden parachute, and buried under an avalanche of legal action. The evidence Amelia secured was ironclad, leading to a landmark settlement that restored the lost pensions and provided significant damages to the hundreds of employees he had wronged. The scandal rocked the corporate world. A few weeks later, Amelia stood in the newly renovated employee lounge of the Gilded Sparrow. Marcus Thorne had not only cleaned house at the corporate level, but had insisted on investing in the people on the ground. Samuel, looking 10 years younger, in a smart new uniform, approached her. He was no longer a janitor. Marcus had created a new position for him, employee welfare supervisor for the entire New York restaurant division. His job was to be the voice for the staff, to ensure no one was ever treated with disrespect again. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," Samuel said, his eyes misty. "It's all because of you, Amelia." "It's because of you, Samuel," she replied, smiling. You reminded me what's worth fighting for. Later, Marcus Thorne offered her a permanent, high-level position. I'm starting a new foundation, he explained, dedicated to promoting ethical practices and protecting employee rights. I want you to run it. Amelia looked at the offer, a six-figure salary, a corner office, a life she could never have dreamed of. She accepted without hesitation. She had found her purpose, a purpose forged in the fire of a single defiant act of kindness. She still had the black card. She never used it for lavish personal expenses. To her, it wasn't a symbol of wealth anymore. It was a reminder of the night a quiet waitress roared of the power of a good heart and of the simple truth that sometimes the most valuable thing a person can have is a spine. And there you have it, a story that started with a single courageous act of defiance and ended up toppling a corrupt executive and changing hundreds of lives. Amelia's incredible journey shows us that true wealth isn't measured in credit limits or bank balances, but in courage, integrity, and the fierce, unwavering willingness to stand up for others no matter the cost. She didn't just get a black card, she earned a purpose, and in doing so, she reminded us all that one person can in fact make a world of difference. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have spoken up? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you or restored a little of your faith in humanity, please do us a favor and hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that will capture your heart. Thank you for watching.